The sky has always been the ultimate limit for the human imagination. It is a place of freedom and danger, a place where the soul can fly away from the troubles of the earth. In the early 1920s, aviation was in its wild and reckless youth. Airplanes were made of wood and canvas and wire. They were fragile machines that shook in the wind, and they were flown almost exclusively by men. White men. For a woman to want to fly was considered eccentric. For a black woman to want to fly was considered impossible. But impossibility was just a challenge for Bessie Coleman. She was born into a world that tried to bury her dreams under the weight of poverty and racism. But she refused to stay on the ground. She climbed into the cockpit of history and refused to come down. This is the story of the first African American and Native American woman to hold a pilot license. A woman who looked at the sky and saw not a barrier but a destination. Bessie Coleman was born in the winter of 1892 in a small town in Texas called Atlanta. She was the 10th of 13 children. Her family was poor. Her father was a sharecropper of mixed heritage, being part African American and part Cherokee. When Bessie was just a toddler, her father decided he had enough of the intense racism and segregation laws in Texas. He moved to Oklahoma in search of a better life and self-sufficiency, but he left the family behind. Bessie's mother had to raise the children alone. Life in the Jim Crow South was brutally hard. The children worked in the cotton fields to help put food on the table. But Bessie had a fire in her that the cotton fields could not extinguish. She walked miles to school every day. She loved reading and she loved math. She was smart and she was ambitious. She knew that the cotton fields were not her future. When she was 18, she enrolled in the Colored Agricultural and Normal University in Langston, Oklahoma. She had to borrow money for her tuition, but unfortunately her money ran out after just one semester. She had to drop out and return home, but she did not stay for long. At the age of 23, she moved to Chicago, Illinois. Like so many Black Americans during the Great Migration, she was looking for a way out. She moved in with her brothers and found work as a manicurist at a barber shop on the South Side. It was there, among the sounds of snipping scissors and jazz music playing on the radio, that she first heard the stories that would change her life. Her brothers had served in France during the First World War. They came back with tales of a new world, a world where Black men were treated differently than they were in the segregated United States. And they told her stories of the airplanes. They told her about the women who were flying in Europe, women pilots who were doing stunts in the air. Her brothers taunted her gently, saying that women like them back in France could fly, but Bessie would never be able to fly. It was meant as a joke, but Bessie took it as a dare. She looked at her hands washing and styling hair. She looked at the streets of Chicago that were segregated and discriminatory. She decided that she would not just learn to fly. She would become a pilot. But this was America in the 1910s. Flight schools in the United States were closed to her. No white school would teach a Black woman, and no Black school had the planes or the teachers. It seemed like a dead end, but Bessie Coleman was not the kind of woman to accept a dead end. She decided that if America would not teach her to fly, she would go to a country that would. She decided to go to France. This was a plan of extraordinary ambition. Bessie spoke no French. She had very little money, but she had determination. She got a better job at a chili parlor to save money faster. She spent her nights at the public library studying the French language. She applied to flight schools in France, and finally she received an acceptance. In November of 1920, she boarded a ship in New York Harbor. She left behind everything she knew to cross a vast ocean alone. She was 28 years old. When she arrived in France, the culture shock was intense. But for the first time in her life, she was treated not as a second-class citizen, but as a foreign visitor. It was a revelation. She traveled to an airfield near Paris. She enrolled in the Caudron Brothers School of Aviation. The planes were flimsy Nieuports. The controls were difficult. The instructor was strict and did not speak English. But Bessie had a natural talent. She was not afraid of the machine. She respected the danger, but she did not fear it. The other students were men, and they were wealthy. Bessie was neither. She endured the loneliness and the physical strain. She crashed once during her training. The plane was damaged and she suffered injuries, but she got back into the cockpit as soon as she could. She had to finish. She had to show America what she could do. On June 15, 1921, Bessie Coleman earned her international pilot's license from the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale. She was the first Black woman in history to do so. She was the first Native American woman to do so as well. She was a queen of the skies. She returned to the United States a hero. She knew that she could now fly. But she also knew that she needed to make a living. In those days, stunt flying or barnstorming was the only way to make money in aviation. Pilots would travel from town to town, putting on shows. They would do loops and spins and figure eights. They would walk on the wings of planes and parachute to the ground. Bessie wanted to be a stunt pilot. But she was not just a daredevil. She was a visionary. She wanted to open a flight school. She wanted to teach other black men and women to fly. She wanted to prove that the sky belonged to everyone. But to make her dream a reality, she needed a plane. And to afford a plane, she needed to perform. She returned to the United States and began a media tour. She gave interviews and posed for photos. She was striking. She wore her flight uniform with pride. She smiled radiantly for the cameras. But she soon realized that in the United States, nothing came easy for a black woman. She tried to buy a plane in America, but the dealers would not sell to her. They looked at her with disdain. They told her to go away. She was treated with the same old racism that had tried to ground her in Chicago. So she went back to Europe. She went to Germany and then back to France to take more advanced lessons. She practiced loops and dives. She learned how to handle a plane at the very edge of its ability. She spent months in Europe honing her skills until she was a master of the air. Finally, she had enough money to buy her own plane, a small Curtiss JN-4 biplane. She had it shipped back to the United States. She was ready to begin her career as Queen Bess. In September of 1922, she made her first American appearance at an air show in New York. The crowd was enormous. They came to see the spectacle. They came to see the colored woman who flew. Bessie did not disappoint. She flew the plane with precision and grace. She did loops and turns. The crowd roared. She landed the plane to thunderous applause. This was just the beginning. She spent the next few years traveling across the country. She performed in front of thousands of people. She refused to fly at events that were segregated. She would not perform if black audiences were forced to sit in separate sections. This was a bold stand in the 1920s. It cost her bookings, but she stood her ground. She used her fame to speak to audiences. She told children to reach for the stars. She told black women that they could do anything if they worked hard enough. She became an icon of the Harlem Renaissance. She was a symbol of freedom and defiance. But her life was not all applause and fame. It was a life of constant struggle for money and equipment. Bessie had a terrible accident in February of 1923. She was preparing for a show in California. She was a passenger in her own plane. A mechanic named William Wills was flying it. The engine stalled. The plane went into a spin and crashed nose first into the ground. Bessie was thrown from the wreckage. Her leg was broken. Her ribs were fractured. She suffered severe injuries that would affect her for the rest of her life. The doctors said she might never walk properly again, let alone fly. They wanted to amputate her leg, but Bessie refused. She told them that if she could not dance, she did not want to live. It was a lie. What she really meant was if she could not fly, she did not want to live. She spent months in the hospital. She underwent surgery after surgery, but her will to return to the sky was stronger than the pain. After 2 years of recovery, she was back on her feet. She was walking with a limp, but she was walking, and she wanted to fly. The year 1926 found Bessie in Florida. She had found a new investor who promised to buy her a new plane so she could start her school. It was a JN-4 Jenny biplane. It was an old plane, and it needed maintenance. Bessie and her mechanic William Wills were preparing for a show in Jacksonville. On April 30th, 1926, Bessie and Wills took the plane up for a test flight. They wanted to check the engine. Wills was in the pilot's seat. Bessie was in the back. She was not wearing her seatbelt. She wanted to look over the side of the plane to check the landing field for the show the next day. It was a sunny afternoon in Florida. Suddenly, the plane went into a dive. The mechanic had not tightened a loose wrench. It flew out of the engine and jammed the controls. The plane flipped over. Bessie Coleman was thrown out of the plane at 2,000 feet. She fell to her death instantly. William Wills died moments later when the plane crashed. The world was stunned. Queen Bess was dead at just 34 years old. Her death was a tragedy. It felt like a cruel twist of fate. She had survived the cotton fields of Texas. She had survived the poverty of Chicago. She had survived the racism of America. She had crossed the ocean alone. She had broken barriers that were thought to be unbreakable, only to die in a preventable accident just as her career was reaching its peak. Her body was returned to Chicago. 10,000 people attended her funeral. Her funeral was one of the largest ever held for a black woman in Chicago. Her grave reads, "Simply Brave Aviatrix." But death could not kill her legacy. Bessie Coleman did not live to open her flight school, but her life inspired others to do it for her. Years later, the Tuskegee Airmen, the famous black pilots of World War II, credited Bessie Coleman as an inspiration. She proved that black men belonged in the cockpit. Every woman who puts on a flight suit today owes a debt to Bessie. She opened the door. She kicked it down with her own feet. She showed the world that courage has no color and ambition has no gender. She looked at the barriers of her time, and she flew right over them. Bessie Coleman wanted to be an aviator. She became a legend, and today every time a plane takes to the sky, her spirit is flying right alongside it. She showed us all that no matter how heavy the chains of society, maybe the human spirit can always find a way to fly.